One song. That's sometimes all it took for the government to start paying attention. A microphone, a melody, and somewhere in Washington, a typewriter starts a file. Not a tabloid, not a rumor column, an actual federal case number, opened on a singer.
We don't need to escalate.
Welcome to R&B Revealed. Today we're counting down 10 R&B and soul legends who had real, declassified federal files. Files the FBI watched grow for years, sometimes decades, while the world just heard the songs on the radio and had no idea anyone in Washington was listening too. By the time we reach number 1, you'll know exactly why this artist's death is still argued about 60 years later. Subscribe now, because what's inside that final file is the reason this whole list exists. The countdown begins now. Number 10. Harry Belafonte, Day-O, the Banana Boat Song, 1956. Harry Belafonte had the kind of voice that made Day-O the biggest selling solo album in American history at the time, 1956. An entire country humming a Jamaican folk tune at the breakfast table. The album, simply titled Calypso, was the first LP by any artist to sell over 1 million copies. What most of that country never knew was what Belafonte was doing behind closed doors with the money that song made him. He bankrolled the civil rights movement, quietly, for years. Bail funds for jailed activists. Wire transfers to Birmingham and Selma. Emergency cash that kept Dr. King's organization running when donations dried up. Belafonte stood close to Sam Cooke, close to Sidney Poitier, close to King himself. He also refused to play segregated venues throughout the South, walking away from paying gigs at a time when that kind of stand could end a career. The FBI noticed. Surveillance reports tracked his meetings, his calls, his travel, building a paper trail on a man whose only documented offense was writing checks for a cause his own government had decided was dangerous. Years of watching. No crime ever found. In 1968, Belafonte became the first black entertainer to guest host The Tonight Show for a full week, using the platform to bring on Dr. King and Coretta Scott King as guests at the height of that same surveillance. Decades later, Belafonte would say in interviews that he always assumed his phone was tapped, that certain conversations he simply learned to have in person instead. He never stopped. He kept singing calypso ballads to sold-out rooms by night, and kept quietly wiring money south by morning. 2 lives the public only ever saw one half of. Harry Belafonte spent decades quietly funding the infrastructure of the civil rights movement, bail money, voter drives, emergency wires, while his own government treated generosity itself as grounds for suspicion. That same suspicion, it turns out, didn't stop at the men writing checks. It followed the women singing the songs too, and one of them was about to feel it from 3,000 miles away. Number 9. Miriam Makeba, Pata Pata, 1967. Miriam Makeba was not an American artist, but by 1967, she was one of the biggest voices in soul music in the United States, and Pata Pata was everywhere. Born in Johannesburg in 1932, she'd left apartheid South Africa, found a home in the American civil rights and soul scene, and earned the nickname Mama Africa. She testified before the United Nations about the brutality of apartheid, a speech that got her South African citizenship revoked on the spot. She couldn't go home again even if she wanted to. In 1968, she married a man named Stokely Carmichael, leader of the Black Power movement. Almost immediately, concert bookings dried up across America. That marriage earned her a 292-page FBI file. 292 pages, tracking her and Carmichael's every move, tour schedules, hotel addresses. According to the documents, agents even recorded the couple's 1968 purchase of a new refrigerator and 2 washing machines. Read that twice. The most powerful law enforcement agency in the world dedicated real manpower to logging Miriam Makeba's household appliances. Not because she broke a law, because of who she loved and what he stood for. The couple eventually left the United States for Guinea, where Makeba would remain in exile for the better part of 3 decades before ever performing on American soil again. Her signature hit, sometimes called the click song by English-speaking audiences because of the Xhosa clicking consonants in its title, had already made her one of the first African artists to top American charts. It made no difference to the file. The Bureau kept tracking her travel itineraries well into the 1970s, long after any realistic security concern could have justified it. Miriam Makeba's FBI file runs nearly 300 pages, and the most damning thing in it is a list of kitchen appliances. Proof the surveillance was never really about danger. It was about marriage to the wrong man at the wrong time. She wasn't the only group of women being watched that year for simply standing in the wrong place. 3 more famous faces were about to learn the same lesson on a stage in Atlanta. Number 8, The Supremes. Someday We'll Be Together, 1969. April 1968. Atlanta is still raw from Dr. King's assassination days earlier. A memorial concert is being planned, a lineup of the biggest names in black music, the Supremes among them. It never happens. Federal informants flagged it as a potential spark for racial unrest, and the show was canceled. The Supremes weren't radicals. Motown built them to be the most polished, most crossover-friendly act in the building, with Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Florence Ballard trained for months in choreography, posture, and diction before ever touching a national stage. And it didn't matter. A memo exists today documenting how 3 women in matching gowns, simply by standing on a stage of public grief, were treated as a risk worth tracking. By 1969, Someday We'll Be Together hit number 1, the group's 10th and final chart topper with Diana Ross as lead before she left for a solo career. But original member Florence Ballard never saw any of it from the inside. She'd been pushed out in 1967, replaced by Cindy Birdsong amid contract disputes and management battles that had nothing to do with any FBI file, and everything to do with an industry built to extract first and protect never. She sued Motown for back royalties and lost. She would die in 1976 at 32, on public assistance, a few miles from the studio that made her famous. Mary Wilson, the last surviving original member for decades, spent years afterward publicly pushing for Ballard's story to be told accurately, writing about it in her own memoirs long before documentaries finally caught up. The federal memo about a canceled concert survived in government archives. For years, nobody outside the group seemed nearly as interested in preserving the truth about what happened to Florence. A federal memo exists, documenting the cancellation of a 1968 concert over fears the Supremes might spark unrest. But no federal file, no investigation, no paper trail exists anywhere documenting how the industry itself let Florence Ballard fall into poverty and an early grave. The Bureau, it turns out, was far better at watching artists for politics than it ever was at watching the people actually circling them with danger in mind. Number 7. Whitney Houston. I Will Always Love You, 1992. By the time I Will Always Love You became the biggest selling single by a woman in chart history in 1992, holding the #1 spot on the Hot 100 for 14 weeks, Whitney Houston already had a federal file open on her. Not for politics, for the people who wouldn't leave her alone. In 1988, an obsessed fan mailed her letters disturbing enough that the FBI got involved. He claimed, in his own words, that he might hurt someone with some crazy idea. Agents tracked him down and interviewed him. He said he only wanted a response from her. In 1992, an unnamed lawyer reportedly tried to extort her, demanding first $100,000, then $250,000, threatening to leak private details to the press. The case wasn't pursued federally. In 1999, a stranger overseas sent her a tape, insisting a song she'd recorded was secretly his. By the time the Bureau released the file in 2013, a full year after Houston's death, it ran 128 pages. Not one page of it was about danger she caused. Every page was about danger aimed at her, danger the federal threshold was usually too high to actually prosecute. There's something almost unbearable about reading a federal file built entirely around other people's obsession with someone, knowing the world kept fixating on what it could take from her. Money, access, a piece of a voice that wasn't built to be owned. Right up until the day in a Beverly Hills hotel bathtub when nobody was watching closely enough at all. 128 pages of federal documentation prove the world spent decades trying to threaten, stalk, and extort Whitney Houston, and not one of those pages led to the kind of protection that might have changed how her story ended. The irony writes itself. The voice insured for millions, the face on magazine covers worldwide, the woman strangers felt entitled to threaten by mail and by phone, and the safest place she ever stood, by every account from people who knew her, was a recording booth with a closed door. If you think the next files are just more of the same, you're wrong. Number 6 involves a song you've sung 100 times, written by a man the FBI investigated for a check that simply vanished. Number 6. Marvin Gaye. What's Going On, 1971. What's Going On became the soundtrack of a generation's grief over Vietnam and inner-city poverty in 1971. The song was partly inspired by Marvin Gaye's brother Frankie, who'd just returned from 3 years of combat duty and described what he'd seen overseas. Berry Gordy hated it on first listen, reportedly calling it the worst thing he'd ever heard and refusing to release it for months. Gaye threatened to never record for Motown again until Gordy relented. The song went on to become the label's fastest-selling single up to that point, moving over 100,000 copies in its first week alone.
Me with brutality.
So here's the twist. His actual FBI file has nothing to do with any of that. It's 6 pages long. It's about 2 concerts he played in Richmond and Norfolk, Virginia, in 1977, where Gaye claimed he was never paid. The Bureau opened an investigation into a redacted business person whose $75,000 check was allegedly tied to getting Gaye to the gig in the first place, and whether it involved transporting stolen property across state lines.
I wanna know.
The file just stops. No resolution. No named suspect. 6 pages, and the government never finished chasing down who actually stole from one of the most important artists of his era. By then, Gaye was already drowning in debt from his divorce settlement with Anna Gordy. Nearly $2 million by the time of his death 7 years later.
There's far too many of you.
Picture that for a second. The man who just spent 3 years agonizing over a concept album about poverty, war, and ecological collapse was, by the late 1970s, dodging the IRS and unable to collect a paycheck for 2 nights of work. Friends later said he performed those shows half out of obligation, half out of sheer financial desperation, never imagining the federal government would end up the only entity that bothered to ask where the money went. 7 years later, Marvin Gaye would be shot dead by his own father in their Los Angeles home. No FBI file, no federal jurisdiction. Just a coroner's report and a city in mourning. The only federal file that exists on Marvin Gaye documents an unresolved theft of his own money, meaning the government's most detailed paper trail on him is proof of how badly the industry was still robbing him, right up until the end.
All you need is faith.
Number 5. Curtis Mayfield, People Get Ready, 1965. Dr. King reportedly used People Get Ready to calm and motivate crowds before some of the movement's most dangerous moments, and the song would later be ranked among Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time. Curtis Mayfield never shouted. He wrote gospel-coded protest songs in falsetto with the impressions, and somehow made Revolution sound like a love song.
Coast to coast.
A federal file exists on Mayfield today, declassified and sitting in government archives. Proof that a soft-voiced songwriter from Chicago's Cabrini Green projects was significant enough to track. Radio stations in his own hometown of Chicago banned his earlier single, Keep On Pushing, during periods of unrest, worried its message of pride might be mistaken for incitement. In 1968, he founded his own label, Goddam Records, determined to control his own publishing the same way Sam Cooke had tried to a few years earlier.
Just to save his own.
He never marched at the front of a single protest line. His only weapon was melody. It was enough to earn a file anyway. By 1972, he'd reinvented himself again, scoring the Superfly soundtrack, which outsold the film itself and earned him a Grammy nomination. That soundtrack alone moved over 1 million copies and produced 3 hit singles, all while Mayfield was simultaneously warning listeners, in the same songs, about the very drug culture the film glamorized. It was the kind of contradiction only a songwriter this precise could pull off, condemning and soundtracking the same crisis in the same breath. In 1990, a lighting rig collapsed on him on stage in Brooklyn, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. He recorded his final vocals lying on his back, one breath at a time, for 9 more years, releasing his last album, New World Order, in 1996. No government file documents that decade of pain, only the one from 20 years earlier, when the danger they tracked was a song that made people believe they deserved better.
Thank the Lord.
He died in 1999, the same year that album came out, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted him posthumously 2 years later. The federal government had spent more time tracking his lyrics in the 1960s than any institution ever spent investigating the safety standards at the outdoor stage that ended his ability to walk.
You don't need no ticket.
The government found Curtis Mayfield's hope-filled protest music worth a surveillance file, but no government file, no safety investigation, ever followed the accident that left him paralyzed for the rest of his life. Number 4. James Brown. Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, 1968. The night after Dr. King's assassination, James Brown took the stage in Boston anyway, broadcast live on local television, and is widely credited with helping keep that city from erupting the way Washington and Chicago did that same week. Months later, he released Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, which spent 6 weeks at number 1 on the R&B chart that fall. By his own account in his later memoir, that's exactly when he believed his own government started watching him differently. CNN's own investigation decades later uncovered evidence consistent with extensive FBI surveillance on Brown, with lingering, unconfirmed questions about CIA interest the agency has never fully answered. Ironically, the same era saw Brown touring Vietnam to perform for American troops and later visiting the White House across 8 different presidential administrations, even as he privately believed he was being watched through his own television set.
You're killing me. All right.
In his memoir, Brown described the surveillance in almost paranoid detail, convinced agents had some kind of technology that let them see inside his home through the screen. His co-author admitted he doubted the claim was literally true, but included it anyway, because Brown believed it so completely, it had become part of how he understood his own fame. Then there's the file the government can't deny because they released it themselves. In 1988, during a police chase from South Carolina into Georgia, fueled by what Brown's biographers describe as one of the lowest moments of his life, officers shot his truck more than 20 times by his own account, struck him in the mouth hard enough to loosen his dental work, and broke the windows while he sat locked inside, terrified. The FBI's own report documents the claim in detail, down to the exact number of shots fired into the tires and hood. A jury convicted him anyway. He served 2.5 years and was released in 1991. His wife Adrian corroborated his account to federal investigators, describing what she called a pattern of harassment against her husband stretching back over a year before that night. Brown spent the rest of his life telling that story to anyone who'd listen, insisting the official record finally backed him up. By then, almost nobody outside South Carolina was still paying attention. The one FBI file that actually confirms James Brown's lifelong claim of being watched isn't about Black Power surveillance at all. It's a 1988 report documenting the exact kind of violent force he spent 2 decades insisting his country was capable of aiming at him.
Upset. Tennessee made me lose my rest.
Number 3. Nina Simone. Mississippi Goddam, 1964. Nina Simone wrote Mississippi Goddam in under an hour, her response to a Birmingham church bombing that killed 4 little girls. She performed it at Carnegie Hall in March 1964, in front of an audience that initially laughed at the title, unsure if she was serious. Radio stations across the South banned it. Promotional copies came back in the mail, snapped in half on purpose. She'd already spent years carrying a separate wound. Rejection from the Curtis Institute of Music as a teenager, a decision she believed to her dying day was about race, not talent.
Alabama's got me so.
The FBI noticed her closeness to CC activists, her friendship with Stokely Carmichael, her growing presence at movement events. And then, according to later reporting, her FBI file was destroyed. Gone. No declassification. No FOIA release decades later. Simply erased. By 1970, exhausted by the surveillance and by an America that kept promising change it never delivered, she left the country. Barbados first, then Liberia, then France, where she'd spend most of the rest of her life. She wouldn't perform regularly in the United States again for nearly 2 decades. In exile, she kept writing. To be young, gifted, and black, released the same year she left, became its own anthem, covered by Aretha Franklin, and embraced by an entirely new generation that never fully grasped why the woman who wrote it had to leave the country in the first place. She died in France in 2003, at 70, finally at peace in the country that had simply let her be.
They keep on saying go slow.
The FBI's surveillance file on Nina Simone was reportedly destroyed, meaning the clearest government record of exactly how closely they tracked the woman behind Mississippi Goddam was erased before history could ever hold them fully accountable for it. Number 2. Aretha Franklin. Respect, 1967. The same year, Respect hit number 1 and became an anthem for an entire movement. The FBI's file on Aretha Franklin was already growing. The song earned her the first 2 Grammy Awards of her career in 1968 for Best Female R&B Vocal Performance, beginning a streak that would eventually total 18 Grammys. By the time journalists finally pieced the file together decades later, it ran 270 pages, spanning 1967 to 2007, 40 years. It tracked her addresses, her phone numbers, her appearances at NOCP and Southern Christian Leadership Conference events. It flagged a planned 1968 memorial concert for Dr. King as a potential trigger for racial disturbance. It used phrases like militant black power concept and hate America to describe a woman whose actual documented offense was offering to pay Angela Davis's bail in 1970. The file also logged death threats against her, including a 1974 extortion letter threatening to drag her own father into danger. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Every single year of surveillance, every informant report, arrived at the same conclusion. Nothing. No evidence of extremism, ever. Just a woman who sang gospel, supported her community, and grieved her father's friend in public, watched for 4 decades by a government that could never actually prove the thing it kept looking for. Franklin's own son, Cooke, said years later that his mother likely never even knew how closely she'd been followed. Number 1. Sam Cooke. A Change Is Gonna Come, 1964. December 11th, 1964. A Los Angeles motel. A gunshot. Sam Cooke dies nearly naked. The case ruled justifiable homicide within hours. The investigation closed almost before it opened. He was 33 years old.
Somebody keep telling me don't.
He just released A Change Is Gonna Come, written after being turned away from a whites-only motel in Louisiana, inspired in part by Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind. Cooke believed a song that powerful should have come from a black voice. It would become one of the defining anthems of the civil rights era. He'd already crossed over from gospel stardom with the Soul Stirrers into pop music years earlier, scoring his first #1 with You Send Me in 1957. He was friends with Malcolm X, friends with a young boxer about to become Muhammad Ali. He owned his own record label, SAR Records, and his own publishing company, founded in 1961, almost unheard of for a black artist at the time. The FBI was watching him for exactly that. The closeness to Malcolm X, the closeness to Ali, the refusal to let his publishing rights be quietly absorbed by people who didn't look like him. And then, like Nina Simone's file, Sam Cooke's FBI file was reportedly destroyed. Gone. No FOIA release. Just secondhand fragments mentioned in other people's records. The official story has never fully held together. A motel manager named Bertha Franklin fired the fatal shot. A companion, Elisa Boyer, gave an account that changed under questioning. More than 200,000 people viewed his body at the funeral home. Over 15,000 packed his Chicago funeral. Retrospective reviews, even by the Lapt itself, have called the original investigation inadequate. No federal involvement, despite a man under federal surveillance dying under circumstances nobody in Washington apparently revisited. His manager, Alan Klein, would go on to control the rights to his recordings for years afterward. The album he'd been most proud of, a raw, unfiltered live recording called Live at the Harlem Square Club, 1963, was considered too rough for radio and shelved by his label, not released to the public until 1985, more than 2 decades after his death, and long after he could ever know it found its audience. Smokey Robinson said for years the story never sat right, that the careful, deliberate man he knew didn't match the reckless figure described in the official report.
Hang around. It's been a long...
We will likely never know what really happened that night, and maybe that government-shaped silence is the most painful truth this entire countdown has to offer.
It's been a long...
10 files, 10 voices the government watched closer than it ever watched the people who actually wanted to hurt them. Some of those pages survived, declassified piece by piece, fought for in court for years. Some were destroyed before history could hold anyone accountable. Either way, they sit now like letters mailed to a future version of all of us. Proof that the watching never really stopped, even when the watching never found a single crime worth prosecuting. If tonight changed how you hear one of these songs, tell us which one in the comments. Subscribe. Because we are not done uncovering the voices behind the legends. The music never lies, even when the industry does.